So once again, good evening, everyone from Master Trust, and welcome back to our this edition of Master Talk, which is our initiative to bring you closer to the industry experts. At the outset, I would like to wish everyone a very happy and healthy 2021. And as I think all our attendees would agree that 2020 was an absolute roller coaster ride for most of us in multiple ways. One thing that has changed very quickly has been the stock market trends. And as we have seen for the past few months, we have broadly been one directional. And even as we speak today, though there has been some sort of a correction today, the indices are still very close to their all-time highs. And usually, such times bring in a lot of questions in investors and advisors like us that whether we should stay invested, whether we should try and book profits that sit on the side, and maybe try and attempt timing the markets. So, our session today will look to provide more insights into these and many other questions and dilemmas that we all have at such market levels, and also help us on how best we can maintain calm and keep the focus on the real reason for making the investment. With that, I would like to welcome Mr. Rohit Agarwal, Equity Fund Manager at Kotak Life Insurance. Rohit has been in the industry for about 16 years plus, with 10 years in capital markets with Kotak, and prior to that, he was working for about 6 years with JP Morgan. As Isha has already mentioned, we would request all the participants to type in their questions, and we would try and have them addressed during the course of this webinar. With that, I would like to hand over to you, Rohit.
Hi, thank you, Angad. Am I audible? Just doing a check.
Yes, yes, Rohit, you are.
Great. Hello, everyone who is on the call. Thanks for taking out time on a Friday evening. Uh, Friday evenings used to be very different before COVID struck us. We all know that. Uh, at the outset, my sincere apologies for not doing a video call because I had some issue with my Wi-Fi router. Goes to show how underinvested we are in technology. What I intend to do is talk a little bit about, of course, how the macro looks at this point in time, the global macro, the Indian macro, and then follow it up with what are my views on Indian markets. I do not intend to make it a monologue, so I will try to keep it short, and I would encourage more and more questions coming in so that we can have a much more interactive session. Since we are not face to face with each other in physical proximity, that is why I would like to have not a presentation format, but more of a Q&A format so that you can ask me questions, and to the best of my ability, I'll try to answer them. We all know how 2020 was. As Angan mentioned, it was a roller coaster year. But there's a saying in markets that Rome was not built in a day, but Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed in a day. What that means is, if I have to draw a parallel to it, when the COVID 19 issue struck us, the central bankers across the world actually behaved as if they built Rome in a day. Versus 2008, when the global financial crisis had happened, the Lehman Brother crisis, what the central bankers had done at that time was obviously they started printing money. But at that time, they started printing money anywhere between 6 to 9 months after the whole issue had struck us. Now, as we all say that you should learn from your own mistakes or you should learn from history, I think the global central bankers took a leaf out of that history, and this time around, come March and April, they started printing. What they did in printing itself was very different from what they did in 2008 2009. In 2008 and 9, they printed close to anywhere between 6 to 8% of their respective GDPs in form of printing. This time around, as we speak, that number is at least double and more in some countries. What that tells us is to every problem, the gauntlet or the solution that is being thrown at by the global central bankers is liquidity. To that extent, that I believe that the markets have found their vaccine. That vaccine is liquidity currently. Now, what do we do with liquidity? Of course, liquidity alone cannot keep taking markets higher forever, right? It's happened recently. It's happened in the last 6 months, 8 months. But what needs to happen now? We are of the opinion that apart from liquidity, there are two or three very important things that you need to watch. Those are, what are the consensus EPS upgrades for forward earnings or every quarter for Asia ex Japan for the world? If I were to use that metric, we have seen at least 2 to 3% EPS upgrade for the world. 2 to 3 might sound minuscule to all of us because we are in the Indian context, but in the world context, it's not a small amount. What are we looking for going ahead? What we are looking is, the expectation currently is that even now, after this quarter also, the earnings of the world ex Asia, ex Japan, Asia ex Japan should again rise by another 2 3%. Now, why is this happening? This is happening because the recovery in the economies by and large have been faster than what people thought, and they have been swifter than what people thought. Within that space, actually, India is a standout. Now, this might sound a little biased because all of us in the call are probably Indians, but one very, very important thing has happened in India, which has not happened in the other counterparts across the world. That is, if you look at this year, the Indian GDP is likely to degrow about 7 to 10%, give or take, whichever number you're comfortable with. So we are going to end the year at a GDP number of -7 to -10. But do you know the Nifty earnings this year? The Nifty earnings this year is likely to grow close to 10%. That's never happened in history, that the GDP degrows by 7 10%, but the Nifty earning grows by 10%. In fact, the last 5 year Nifty CAGR earning is not even 10%. And that was when the GDP was growing at 5 to 7%. So, why this dichotomy that GDP is degrowing by 7 to 10%, but suddenly Nifty earnings are growing by 10%? This is the new change which has happened. If you ask me, I had expected this to happen during DeMon or during GST, but it has actually happened during COVID. What is this change? This change is nothing but a shift from unorganized to organized. The shift which we thought would happen when GST comes in, the shift which we thought will happen when demonetization happened, that shift happened very momentarily, but it did not last. But during COVID, that shift has happened, we believe, for good. Why do we believe that shift has happened for good? Let's talk with a few examples. What's happened during COVID is that the supply chain of the unorganized guy has got broken for good. During the pandemic, especially in the first quarter or so, first 3 months when the pandemic struck us, most of the unorganized guys, which would be more area specific guys, were not able to manage the supply chain. And after the initial hiccups, most of the branded or the organized guys were able to manage the supply chain. Hence, what happened was the distributors decided to disown the unorganized guys and went and tied up with the organized guys. Now, one may say that when things become all right, the same distributor will flip again and go back to the unorganized because he was selling through the unorganized guy because he was obviously getting a higher margin or a higher commission. But in our opinion, it will not be the same even after some time. The reasons are that the distributor has understood the importance of a correct or a good and an efficient supply chain. He has understood that whatever happens in good times or bad, the organized guy is always there for me. But an unorganized guy who currently mostly has issues with liquidity, issues with solvency, issues with distributorship, issues with supply chain, may or may not be the right guy. Fortunately for us, the market is represented by organized guys. Unfortunately for the economy as a whole, when you look at it as a whole picture, you always get the feeling that the situation on the ground is not so good, but why are the markets so buoyant? Let us take examples. Look at what's happening in sectors which we hitherto believed they were actually organized, or we believed that the share of unorganized was there but not so large. Take example, for example, of say a paint company. Now, the largest paint company in India is still gaining market share after having close to 50% market share, and he is gaining market share all across the board in the high-end paints and also at the lower end. Why is that happening? That is happening because his supply chain is so efficient that he is able to supply or undercut the unorganized guy, and hence, by undercutting the unorganized guy, he is taking away market share from him, and that market share is not going to come back to him. Let's take more examples. In segments like, say, pipes and fittings, PVC pipes, CPVC pipes, there are thousands of producers of pipes in India. That's a startling revelation in itself. We always thought that there are only 4 or 5 guys, the listed guys, who produce pipes in India. There are thousands of guys who produce pipes. But if you look at what's happened, the volume growth of the organized guys, the ones which are listed on the Indian stock exchanges, the volumes have been growing in double digits or more, whereas the industry has at not even been flat. Same is true for jewelry. The jewelry industry has degrown, but the biggest guy on the street is growing his numbers by 15%. This is true for every industry by and large, give or take. What that tells us is the big is getting bigger and they'll continue to get bigger. Now, I also made one statement that I believe India Inc. means India Incorporation and corporates of India, have done a better job than some of the counterparts either in the Middle East, Southeast, or even the Western worlds. I'm a big fan of examples. Let us take a few more examples. Indian IT companies, which are at least 15 to 17% of the weightage in the Nifty, do you know that travel cost for Indian IT companies is anywhere between 1.5 to 2.5% of their revenues, not cost. Now, when we speak to IT companies, in this quarter itself, one of the IT companies told us that 3.5% of their workforce is actually working from office right now, and they are growing handsomely. I'm not saying that the travel cost will not come back, but what these companies are trying to tell us is that even if travel cost comes back, it will not come back to 2.5% of revenues. It will probably end somewhere between 1 to 1.5%, depending upon the company, the geography. What it means is there's a permanent saving of 100 basis points on EBITDA margins. Now, one may argue that over the longer term, this margin benefit may or may not sustain. It's quite possible, but it's also possible that some of the larger companies might use that margin benefit to drive more volumes at a little lesser margin initially and ramp it up later. We have seen that happening without taking names. You will see that again, the larger ones will gain market share even in a sector like IT, which we never thought will be a case of which will have such kind of shifts. Let's take more examples. The Indian consumer sector. The Indian consumer sector has costs anywhere between 15 to 25% as advertisement plus other expenditure. Now, during the COVID times, most companies have cut that expenditure anywhere between 200 basis points to 800 basis points. Again, our conversation with most of those companies suggests that as things open up, a lot of these costs will come back. But fair to assume that even if 70% of these costs come back and 30% don't, then you're again looking at 100 to 200 basis points of EBITDA margin expansion, ceteris paribus, meaning we don't change any other thing or any other parameter to come through. What that means is that the Indian earnings growth trajectory, which we never saw in the last 5 years, has a higher probability of happening. I'm not saying it will happen because, as they say, There is many a slip between the cup and the lip. In the past, it has happened that every year the specialists start the year with assuming 20% growth on Nifty, and for the last 5 years, it actually was an average of not even 10%. And ironically, that 10% number is coming when no one expected it. So, my point is in India, we have a habit of doing things better when we are pushed against the wall. We are naturally like that. We are not people who always excel in every circumstance. But as a community, as a country, when we are pushed against our backs, when our backs are against the wall, we tend to do good things. What are the good things we believe we have done as a country? I believe the longer term positives of COVID 19 are some of the schemes that have come through the Atmanirbhar scheme, the PLI schemes. Now, obviously, PLI scheme did not come only because of COVID, it was actually pre COVID. So, a lot of it is to do with the US and China trade war. That's when it started. When some of the US companies and the Japanese companies and some of the bigger buyers across the world started saying that we want a China plus one policy. How much of it will India benefit from? We don't know. But all I can say is if we can take 5% of that pie, 5% of that pie, we would have done a great deal. In my personal opinion, the PLI scheme for mobile phones is a great success already. So if you see, the latest iPhones are now made in India. The largest Samsung mobile factory is now in India. There will be hiccups, like what we heard in what's happened in one of the Apple factories in Bangalore. But I think we'll get through it. Some of the other sectors where we are keenly awaiting implementation of the PLI scheme is the pharma API, the auto, and some of the other sectors. Now, this is just the starting. What you should just do is look at the Indian import numbers and see the biggest items of import. That is where you will get the idea as to where the PLI schemes will come. If the companies put good mind towards it, I think all of these schemes will become a big success and India will be a better country. One of the way we gauge the health of a country is not by FII flows. That's the number that all of you look at every day. On an average, 2,000 crores in the first 2 months, 3 months every day, right? Angad? Some number like that. Yeah. November and December record flows. But let me ask you a question which you cannot answer right, but you need to keep it in mind. Is FII flow a better indicator or FDI a better indicator? Now, what is FDI? FDI is money that is given to you by a company or invested in your country by a company for next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. I believe that is what is more important for all of us. If we continue to get good FDI, what it tells us is people are now ready to take call in India for the next 20, 30, 40 years. FI money is hot money which keeps coming in, keeps going out. Bear in mind, FI money is not just coming in India, it's coming in emerging markets as a whole, right? So that can change, that can flip. So my point is we always try to be circumspect. We should be. We always try to be not too much optimistic. We shouldn't be. But there's a very good thing that I always tell everybody. India is a country which gives an opportunity to the optimist as well as the pessimist. The reasons are as follows. For the optimist, the next 5 year, 10-year, 20-year story always looks rosy. For the pessimist, the 8 to 10% growth never happens on a CAGR basis. So India is a country, in my opinion, which has a spot of anywhere between 5 to 8% GDP growth. And our sweet spot, in my personal opinion, again, is not at 10% growth. Because if even if we manage to grow 10%, our infrastructure and our systems and processes are not geared up for us to deliver that on a CAGR basis. But a 5 to 8% is something which is more sustainable in a country like India, given the constraints of democracy that we live in. That's my broad view on the broad macro. Now, if I talk about, as I said, the earnings itself this year, even with GDP decline of 8%. So next year, FY22, we expect that the GDP should be broadly the same as what it was in FY20. So if in this year, if Indian GDP declines by 7 to 10%, next year it makes up that decline, and in FY22 we can be broadly at the same number. Don't hold me to it. These numbers keep changing, but I don't think that'll be very much different from what I'm telling you right now. But however, the Nifty EPS in FY22 will not be the same as FY20. And that's the biggest change, in my opinion. In FY22, as we sit currently, the market participated in that may be a little optimistic again, but I think a high teen number is envisageable given how things currently stand. So if you look at it, FY20 to 22, your GDP is the same, but your earnings will be higher by 30%. 10% this year and another 15, 18 this next year. So actually 30 to 40%. Now that's a big jump. That will also take away some of the pessimist view that Indian ROEs are very low in the last few years. Obviously, it has been because we have spent capex and operating leverage has not come through. So my I'm optimistic on Nifty earnings coming back, provided we don't get another COVID shock. Now, the next big question that anyone will ask me is, what is the view on the market for the next 6 months? Well, let me put it this way. After every pandemic, when I say pandemic, I assume 2008 was also a pandemic, the global financial crisis. It was a crisis. So let's call it a crisis. There was a crisis in 2008. Then there was something in 2011. There was currency crisis. There was issue in the European side. What I want to bring to your attention is after a crisis, it's generally not happened that another crisis strikes the very next year. But what happens is there are pullbacks in the equities, and history suggests, as I said, unfortunately, I am not able to interact with you on a video today. Otherwise, I would have shown you the data that pullbacks have happened anywhere between 10 to 15% only, unless another crisis strikes. What may happen is markets may stagnate. What may happen is markets may fall 10 odd percent or 15%. This can happen in two scenarios. Any deep correction than that can have scenarios which are as follows. As I said initially, markets have found their vaccine, and that vaccine is liquidity. If liquidity were to go away, markets will give up some of the steam. Why can and how can liquidity go away? Two scenarios. Liquidity will be pulled back by central bankers across the world, including India, if the inflation shoots up to a very high degree. So, if the inflation target is 4 plus minus 2%, as in is in India, and it is different in different countries, if if it in inter for a small period of time, the central bankers will ignore it. But if it sustains below their target for a longer period of time, then the central bankers will be forced to withdraw some of the easy liquidity which is floating around. Actually, in India, last week we did see some action by the RBI where they have put in some measures to take away some of the liquidity from the 7 lakh crores which is there surplus for quite some time. But either inflation has to surprise us on the high side in a big way, or growth has to come back in a big way. If inflation surprises in a big way on the upside on a sustainable basis, then the pullback in the equity market can be sharp, and that cut can be anywhere between 15 to 30% or so. But if the liquidity is withdrawn because the growth surprised you on the upside, then even though markets will react on the downside, they will get bought because a higher growth will eventually mean that people will come back to equities. So for equities to fall meaningfully, which they can, unless if anything like COVID happens again, or for example, for all you know, after taking the vaccine, data comes out that it's actually not turned out to be that effective. I have no clue about that, but I'm just giving you a scenario. If those two scenarios of inflation and growth do not happen, then I believe corrections will be intermittent. They may be sharp of 15 odd percent, but they will get bought. With that, I would stop here, and I would be happy to take your questions on whatever issues come to your mind.
Thank you so much, Rohit, for that. So before we move on to the attendees, I have a couple of questions for you. So could you also throw some light on what is your, what are the parameters and what is your strategy in the current market scenario in deploying money in equities? Any specific sectors that you like, or any specific segments of the market that you are, that you're bullish upon going forward?
Sure, Angad. Some of the segments and the segments that we like, I think I touched upon. I will reiterate. Some of the segments we like are China plus one strategy. Those segments will be specialty chemicals, where India was already taking giant steps just before COVID struck. And after COVID, it has only accelerated. We also like sectors which are related to PLI scheme and the Atmanirbhar scheme. These are two, three very important sectors we like. Apart from that, not from a structural basis, but for the next year or so, we actually like the real estate sector. Now, that may be very dichotomous, in my opinion, when I say I like the real estate sector. The reasons are as follows. In the history of markets and real estate market, there have been very, very few instances when the equity markets are at high and real estate markets are not at highs. It is one of the rare instances in history where equities are at high, but real estate market is down anywhere between 20 to 40% depending upon the city or the geography you're talking about. Secondly, the borrowing rates for real estate in India at 675, which my bank offers, is the lowest borrowing rate in quite a few years. World over, a very low borrowing rate for housing is the first sign or the biggest sign of the bottoming of real estate. Currently, in my opinion, both of these things are in your favor. Equity markets are at high, real market is at the real estate market is not. Typically, when you what happens is when the equities go up, 2003 to 2007 bull cycle, people made money into equities, put that money into real estate. So real estate also kept going up. The same is not true this time around. So why not put some money into real estate? I'm not saying go and buy physical real estate. As a market participant, there are different ways of playing real estate. And the second point, as I said, is the lower cost of borrowing. You're today getting home loan at 675, 7 for most other banks. That's a quite low home loan rate. Even in 2008-9, it was 7 quarter and 740, 750. Globally, depending upon the interest rate of that particular country, it has always been a very good technical fundamental indicator or barometer for the bottoming up for the bottoming of the real estate. So for the next 6 to 12 months to maximum 2 years, we do like real estate. When I say real estate, it does not mean I like all developers or all financiers. What I mean is currently what will happen or is happening is the inventory in the system is getting liquidated. Again, obviously, for any real estate to bottom out, cycle to bottom out, the bottoming out process happens when inventory starts to deplete or inventory starts to reduce. It started to happen. I don't know how many of you are from Mumbai, but if you look at the registration data from Mumbai, it's gone through the roof in November and December. Obviously, it has been helped by a lower stamp duty. But what I'm trying to say is when prices fall, people come back to real estate. And this is a time in the cycle where equity is at high and real estate is 20 to 30% down, and you are getting to borrow at 7%. So, how to play it? Some of you can play it through the real estate finances itself, the good ones, in my opinion. Or the other way could be, as I said, that it is necessary that new projects will get launched and get consumed, but a lot of inventory will get liquidated. A lot of investor flats are getting liquidated. What that means is when you buy a new flat and which is ready to move in, there'll be a lot of demand for paints, adhesives, tiles, plywood, take your pick, the whole building material space. I think we like all of that space as well for the next 6 to 12 months to a year or so. Yeah. So are you there?
Rohit? Yes, I am. I am. Right. So, Rohit, within the segment that you've mentioned, any specific counters that you like particularly?
Angad, unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to take names due to
Okay.
compliance agreements.
Right. Right. So this is what you like. How about throwing some light on sectors that you feel could be a little dicey or could be a little risky, maybe because of the valuations or what you expect in terms of business cycles going forward?
Well, as I said, you have to pick and choose. In a liquidity driven world, which is top down, we tend to be bottom up. So I believe in most of the sectors, you have winners currently. Not always the case, simply because, as I said, there's a shift from unorganized to organized. As I said, the jewelry sector is degrowing by 20%, but the biggest guy who's listed on the exchange is growing by 20%. Even though I don't like the jewelry sector, if the guy is growing by 20%, I need to like him, right? If you look at other spaces, the QSR space, it is degrowing, but the guy who's listed on the exchange is growing very handsomely and smartly by putting a charge on delivery and increasing his EBITDA by 20%. I ought to like him. So, what I'm trying to suggest is do not get too much fixated upon a particular sector. Currently, there is a theme which is a good company, a smart company, a well managed, good balance sheet company will make excellent use of this pandemic and gain market share. Even though he's the market leader, he will gain more market share. So then for you to prescribe a multiple is very difficult. Since you touched on that question of multiple and valuation, would you like me to take you through the process in which we pick stocks? If time permits, I don't know, it'll take me 5 8 minutes to explain my process.
Yeah, yeah,
If
not a
you
problem,
have
Rohit.
the time, let
Please.
me know.
Yeah, yeah, we do. Please.
Okay. So what we do is we follow a process which is known as BMV. B for business, M for management, and V for valuation. These are three vectors which we use interchangeably, not interchangeably, uh, all the three we use, not necessarily in the same proportion, not necessarily the same weightage, but we try and juggle in between to find the right balance. Now, let me illustrate again with examples. B, as I said, is business. In all the three segments of business, M for management, and V for valuation, we put three things: green, amber, and red. That is easy for all of us to understand. Now, let us take an example, Angad, if you could help me. Is there, do airline companies across the world make good return on capital employed for themselves and hence shareholders over the cycle? The answer is no, right? You concur with that? That airline companies across the world do not make shareholder wealth across cycles. You may make good money if you were very smart to get at the bottom of the cycle. So if I have to put an airline business into the quadrant of business of green, red, and amber, where would you put it, Angad?
Sorry, could you please repeat that, Rohit? I just lost you in the middle.
No worries. Uh,
Yeah.
airline companies across the world
Uh-huh.
do not make sustainable shareholder wealth, right?
Right.
That's a statement. There is no
Hmm.
debating that. Sustainable wealth creation doesn't happen. Yeah.
Uh,
So if I were to ask you to rate airline company as a business in terms of green, amber, and red, in terms of sustainability or great business, what would your answer be? Is it green? Is it amber? Is it red?
Maybe Amber.
Maybe amber. Perfect. Okay. So this is how we try and come. We say business of an airline industry, amber. Come to M. The management of an airline industry is very important. If you see, Southwest Airlines is the lowest is the most efficient airline in the world. It makes money.
Right.
The most fancy airline of the world, which we may like to travel by, does not necessarily make money for shareholders. A Ryanair makes money, okay, but a Lufthansa doesn't make money, okay. What that tells me is that the M part in a business which is amber, as you rightly said, Angad, that the airline industry is an amber industry. M, which is the management, the people running the show, becomes very, very important in that. If the M in an industry which is amber, if the M which is management is green, then good shareholder wealth creation can happen. An example of that is our own Indian Indigo. Okay. Now, why do I say that Indian M, I would argue, is green and not amber or red? Indigo is not green because it is the cheapest airline. It's a misnomer for everyone on the call. Indigo is Indigo because it decided, for example, I don't know how many people are there on the call today, say 100 odd people, say 50 odd from Master Trust. Do all the employees of Master Trust have the same laptop of the same configuration? The answer to that is maybe no. Yeah. So
Right.
now when Master Trust goes to the suppliers of this laptop for servicing, they have to make 10 or 15 supplier agreements or AMC agreements, which means higher cost. But what Indigo did in the initial first 5 years, they took only one plane, one company, one model. And after fuel cost and employee cost, the biggest cost in an airline is maintenance cost. This is smart management. Okay. My point is, if a business is amber, but the management is green, there are different ways to explain why a management may be green, amber, or red, depending upon how they behave in terms of corporate governance, in terms of policies, in terms of transparency, in terms of their ability to look through, their ability to think through, all of that. Then V, which is valuation, which you touched upon. My personal view is if business is either green or amber, but the management is very green, then valuation may not matter as much. Now, the biggest private bank in the country, in terms of market cap, you would have always found it expensive. You would not ever say that HDFC Bank is cheap. The bank is never cheap, but quality never comes cheap. But it would not have really mattered if you entered at a particular price to book, because in a business which is green, which a banking industry is, because loan growth in India average CAGR is more than 10% and higher for private, management is green. In this case, it is. My point is, if the business is green, not red, if the management is green, not red, do not get stuck on V, which is valuation, because a good management in a good business environment will find a way to create shareholder wealth. Now, V is driven by many things. V is not just an outcome of the Excel sheets we draw. It is an outcome of many things: liquidity, perception, view. Someone can say DCF, someone can do this, that. You can do everything. But V, my friend, is very individualistic and it's very subjective. It's not quantitative. So, my point is never get stuck on a good company and not buy it if you believe the B quadrant, which is business, is green and management is also green, then do not think that it is too expensive. Even if it is, have some exposure. If it falls, buy more, because good managements in good businesses will create shareholder wealth, and not so good managements in not so good businesses will destroy wealth. For example, again, in India, till 2 to 3 years back, telecom was an example of B, which was amber or red, because no company would have created shareholder wealth. Even with a good management, you would not have created any wealth because people were fighting amongst each other and they were cutting each other on prices. So when the business, which is not green but amber, management's business was not amber but red, even a good management with a good strategy could not do anything because in India people are so price sensitive, and in a commodity like world where it is more of volumes, you have to compete on price. You can have little differentiations which we still have. For example, even today in the telecom companies, pricing is different by 10 to 20%. But even with the good management, or red, but the management is green, very good, we believe so, then we do think a lot or debate a lot about valuation, which valuation to enter. So in an industry which is not a great industry, but a management which is great, if I get my timing or call right on the entry point of the stock, I will end up making a lot of money. I know it's a little too heavy, but I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible in this BMV quadrant. You can throw a name to me and I can tell you how it fits and where it fits and how big or small a call I will be like to take on that company. If you need more clarity. Otherwise, I think I did explain what BM and V, how we juggle around with BMV in our approach.
Right, Rohit. So I think it's broadly clear how you go about it. So I would not throw in a company, but maybe we could discuss a specific sector. So obviously, one sector which has been a laggard for a while now, till last February was pharma, and suddenly we've seen this amazing run up that's happened in across all pharma companies. So any specific view on that sector, or how you, is it still a good value to enter?
Okay.
That sector, or is it already overpriced or overvalued now?
Okay. So as I said, I do not know what is overpriced and what is not.
Right.
Okay. In a contextual of the sector, I'll explain how. Okay. Pharma. I'm glad you picked up pharma because the dispersion in either earnings or performance of stocks is the highest always in pharma. That's because the B part in pharma, which is business, can be green, red, or amber depending on the company itself and not the industry,
Right.
unlike other sectors. That's because a particular company in pharma may have decided to concentrate only on India versus a particular company playing an Asia Pac strategy versus a particular company playing a US strategy and a European strategy. Yeah. And in pharma, the risks are way larger than some of the other companies. The risks are the manufacturing practices. Till a year or so back, actually before COVID struck, if you saw, most of the Indian companies were grappling with issues of compliance on manufacturing facilities. Now, what's happened is because of COVID, the US FDA has not been able to have timely compliance inspection, or they have not been able to visit as many manufacturing facilities. At the same time, given the nature of the pandemic, some of the pharma companies that have any relevance or any attachment to anything to do with any COVID related, either the likes of Remdesivir or others, or now in terms of vaccine, they will obviously get bought into. So if you see within pharma, the pure Indian companies, which are not even into chronic, they have which are into acute segment, have not seen price performance because you are not excited about anything new coming. They will continue to grow at 5 to 10 to 12%, versus some of the companies which have a probable tie-up for a vaccine. Now vaccine, earlier the injections of Remdesivir and others. Now a vaccine, the markets will always give them high valuation now on the assumption that something will be able to come. So in pharma, you always only need to be stock specific and need not bother about what is the sector multiple. Because, as I said, a pure Indian company for the last 1 year has gone up by 10 odd percent, whereas a company which has an exposure to vaccine is up by 200%. So we cannot say that the sector has done well. But bear in mind, pharma is, as I reiterate, is only bottom up. The return on capital employed in pharma companies is mid teens. It's not great. So at any point when you see US FDA getting heavy on Indian companies, if they do, And if they have not learned from their past mistakes, then it will be a time to sell. Till that time, given that quite a few of the Indian companies have large manufacturing facilities and capabilities to partner and tie up to supply vaccine dosages across the world at the lowest possible cost and time, they may be in favor. Again, due to compliance reasons, I can't take names, but I think you get the drift, what I'm trying to suggest.
Right.
But the companies which are only domestic oriented, which are not even into chronic but in the acute segment, they are not likely to see earnings acceleration. So even though they might appear to you cheap, as you call it, V on valuation, it may appear cheap. I think investors will still shy away from that, those names.
Right, Rohit. Rohit, I have a couple of questions from one of our participants. So he says that so this is also something that a lot of us face on a regular basis. So obviously, since markets are close to all-time highs, is this a good time to book profits? You know, so that's a challenge that we face. So
Yeah,
what's your
sure.
take on if a client of yours would approach you and ask you, so Rohit, I think the markets have rallied up a lot and I'm making a reasonable return. Is this a good time to book some profit?
See, Angad, yes and no. Okay. Yes, simply because markets have had a fantabulous run. Okay. No, if you are still under invested. For example, what if you're telling me that Rohit, out of 100 rupees of my net worth, 5 rupees or 10 rupees is in markets and that have gone up by 100%? Not enough. But if somebody has 50 odd percent or 80 odd percent invested in markets and he's making handsome profits, the answer is yes. Take some money off, maybe wait. Because now, even if markets go up, you still have made your money on an overall basis, on the basis of your net worth. But if only 3 to 5% of your investable money is in equities and that has doubled, you have made only 3 or 5 rupees extra, no? Then
Right.
by trying to take profits and trying to be cute, what may happen is markets rally another 10% and then give another 15%. But that would not really give you anything meaningful because, see, it's very difficult for anyone to time the exact point where markets will either rise or fall. I can give you indicators. As I said, indicators will be liquidity getting withdrawn or GDP growth not coming back at all, or GDP growth coming back very strongly. These are the three indicators you should watch. Liquidity will get withdrawn if inflation is very high, or growth comes back in a very smart way. And if growth doesn't come back, even with all of this, then liquidity beyond a point can't do anything. So I can give you indicators, but no one can ever. So if you asked me this question 2 months back, I think the question would still have been the same, that the markets have had a very smart run. Should we book profits? Right? So for an investor, the journey is never 3 months, 6 months. The journey has to be 10, 20, 30 years. But yes, if an investor out of his investable corpus has invested 70, 80%, and that's rallied 100%, is it advisable to book some profits and take some money off the table? Answer is yes. That does not mean market can't still go up. It may still, but he will not have the feeling of having left out simply because it was 70% or 80% invested into the markets. Yeah, I hope that answers, because it's not a direct answer. I could give you the answer. Yes, they look expensive. What if they go up another
Right.
10%? Nobody knows that.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think the idea is not to know where the markets go. Idea is on maybe some of our team members on how to face such a question from clients, because there's a little bit of jitter everywhere.
Yeah. So I look at it the other way. Then what I do whenever I face this question, because I also do asset allocation within my firm, is I go back to my debt fund manager and ask him, hey, mate, what is the return you see on GSECs? What is the return you see on bonds? If he tells me I see 8%, I see GSECs rallying by 100 bips or so, if he tells me, then I will say, okay, switch from equity to debt or bond or whatever. Currently, as I see, they are also in a very tight or narrow band. Again, I'm not the expert on debt here, but as much as per my last conversation with my colleague, the reasons of him being in a very tight band today is, even though there is liquidity around, sloshing around, they are not too sure on the inflation and the fiscal deficit part in India, and hence the upward part of the yields itself. So again, I say look for indicators. When the debt guy comes and tells you, I think there is 10% on the table for the next 6 months. I see a 100 pip rally in GSEC. I think that's time to move some money as an asset allocation strategy, no matter what your view on equity is at that point of time, given that they have rallied or doubled. But if the debt guy also comes and tells you, hey, mate, I am not too sure, we are in a 50 bips range plus minus, then it's better to keep riding the liquidity wave unless, as I said, keep checking for the indicators where the indicators turn from either green to amber or red. When they do turn amber or red, sell and sit tight.
Right. So, talking of asset allocation, there is one asset which has been making headlines of late, which is cryptocurrencies. Any view on that?
I don't think I am qualified enough to talk about cryptocurrency, but
Right.
but what I believe is, on a much wider thought, every asset has a cycle and every asset
Right.
has its ups and downs. Okay, so
Right.
uh, I think I gave a hint as to which asset currently is preferred by me when the equities are at high. I think real estate and ancillary. Okay, I'm not saying
Right.
go and buy physical real estate. That's your choice. But I'm saying if somebody were to make a shift, even in the markets, to real estate activity related stock, he could be better off than some of the other companies.
Right. Right, Rohit. I think most of our questions have been answered. So, anything else that you would like to share, apart from what we've already discussed?
Yeah, sure. I think just as a closing remark,
Yeah.
thank you all for being here. See, I have seen all the sides of the market: FII, domestic mutual fund, and now domestic insurance. All I want to tell you is there is no difference for me. I'm a fund manager who manages money in the same
Right.
fervor with the same breath. The difference, however, is that earlier it was difficult for people to get into insurance and make money through ULIPs. But given that
Right.
now we have products, given that tax arbitrage is there, maybe you can get in touch with our product guys. There are products which give you higher IRR. I will like to emphasize on that the IRR to the customer is higher in a ULIP if invested correctly than in a domestic mutual fund today, if you assume the same rate of return from domestic mutual fund schemes and an insurance scheme, which is actually the case, and actually it's higher for us. But I'm saying the IRR of a customer today in a ULIP for the right age category is higher if you were to invest in a domestic mutual fund versus an insurance, which you also get a cover of life cover. I think you should get in touch with our product guys. Apart from that, just one last statement I would like to make on our process. We at Kotak as a group, we are moderate risk takers, but we believe in doing the right things consistently over a period of time. As I explained the BMV model, we are big fans of cash flow model. We believe truly and truly we believe that top line is something which creates sanity. Top line is revenues, it creates sanity. Bottom line is something which is vanity. Okay, but it's cash flow which is reality, and that's the mantra that we at Kotak work with in our approach of BMV and trying to see how companies will do in the future. And that's the way we are, and we follow it consistently, and touchwood we have been able to deliver decent performance over the quite a few years. A natural disclaimer does not mean we'll do it in the in the future, but yeah,
Right.
that's how it is.
Right. Right. Thank you so much, Rohit, for a very interesting and insightful session. And to all the attendees, we would look forward to your feedback and suggestions. And you could get in touch with your relationship managers or visit our website. With that, we would like to conclude this edition of Master Talk. Until we organize another interesting session for you, it's a goodbye from all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Uncle.
Thanks, Manjeet. Thank you.